Hi, Mechanic Ira here, and I'm recording my audio feedback on your statement of belief. I know you're largely finished with your Defining Good Argument digital context essay, but I wanted to share these thoughts just in case they prompt you to revisit aspects of that or return to the larger essay with a slightly different view. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through your statement of belief, and my evaluation, or my feedback is not about evaluation. It's not about assessing the goodness of the statement of belief. I think you did a good job on that. Rather, it's about highlighting some of the things that'd be interesting to hear you talk more about in that larger, more systematic theoretical essay. So basically what I'm going to do is going to just go through and highlight and discuss a few of the points where I think you spoke usefully or well or coherently or really interestingly to something, and a few of the points where I would want to challenge you, or I would hope that your larger essay kind of goes a little further or becomes a little more systematic. So right off the bat, I love your opening sentence. It's a really interesting idea. You want to persuade others in a different way of how you were persuaded. And what I take you to be saying is you recognize that, argument has to speak differently to different audiences. And so you were persuaded of something, but the way that you were persuaded has to be reshaped as a mechanism to speak effectively to others. And I think that's a cool and interesting way to start off. And I like your explanation of why and how that works. This idea that the goal is to change the way other people hear an argument, and I like the realization or the awareness that this makes you, in fact, ultimately more open to a range of ideas your own self. Now, here when we start to talk about being backed up, and it comes up again with being supported, I kind of find myself wondering, okay, but what does that mean to you? What does it mean to back up an argument? You say having this skill proves that there is flaws and areas for improvement. Okay, fair enough. I guess that's the ability to defend both sides skill. But so just sticking with the backed up, supported, what exactly does that mean? You say it proves one statement is better than another. But often we can't really prove that one statement is better than another. Often we have to decide without having any ultimate or final definitive proof. And so if we, in fact, rarely really prove anything outside of mathematics and maybe some logical problems, what's the standard for calling something effective backing up or effective supporting? Same idea with proving valid. We rarely really prove anything valid. That's a really high bar. I mean, it's a good bar. It's a nice bar. It's nice to prove something valid, but mostly we render something persuasive, or we demonstrate that something's plausible, or we show that something's preferable. But proving something valid is a pretty high bar to clear. So I kind of want to challenge you a little bit on this notion that what argument does is prove one position or another better, or prove one position or another valid. And if you kind of step back for a second, then the question becomes, so if argument doesn't necessarily accomplish that, even good argument, what is it doing? And how does that reshape the definition? I also just quickly, I'm not going to highlight at each instance, but I want to encourage you to move past just thinking about two sides, since argument is often multilateral, especially in digital context. And you do talk about that a little bit towards the end of the statement of belief, but I want to make sure that in your defining good arguments in digital context essay, you're definitely thinking beyond sort of the both sides way of talking and are more in that multilateral, multi-sided argument. And not just because it's about how we talk about it, but it also sort of shapes what we think argument is accomplishing. If there are only two sides, then it's easy to say, okay, well, argument shows which side is better, or it persuades somebody that one side is better than the other. But what about cases where there's like 15 sides and there's no final resolution? Can argument still be good? If so, how? how does that reshape the definition? If not, why not? And what do we do with that? And so for instance, you say a solid argument is one that summarizes what was said before them and then uses those claims, i.e. the claims of the one that came before, as support for why there's a lack of information that needs closer argument. I think is a nice way of thinking about one of the things a good argument can do. And again, I kind of want to challenge you, what about these multilateral contexts? What about where there's like 15, 20 arguments that came before and you're only going to summarize some of them, you're only going to speak to some of them? What's the principle of selection? Oh, and are there better and worse ways of doing that? What makes them better and worse? Likewise, this kind of idea of when differentiating between a bad argument and a good one, usually the good arguments are paying attention and giving feedback to the speaker with their ideas in mind. And as a way of thinking about interpersonal argument, I'm totally persuaded by that. I think that's a big part of how we practice respect and share space with each other in the way that you've talked about with Radcliffe here. And it makes me, still want to kind of push you on thinking about what about where we are actually performing argument, not necessarily for the person that we're arguing with or the people we're arguing with, but instead for other audiences. What about cases where we're hoping to reach more than just the audience of our interpersonal interlocutor that we're talking with directly, one other person, or 5 other people even, but are hoping to say things that other third parties, other audiences entirely will come upon and find persuasive or compelling or valuable or important. Do those still have to give feedback to the speaker? If so, why? If not, how does that reshape the definition? And I love like the way that you're drawing on Radcliffe and now Quarter, and like this idea that what's at stake is that we in fact like kind of owe each other something in argument. I think it's a nice, and I think actually maybe important thing to have in mind is like if we're going to interact with each other, we owe each other something. So I'm sold on that. And I really want to make sure that in your Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay, you're thinking about, okay, but what does that mean in digital spaces? What does that mean in anonymous spaces? What does it mean in contexts where we don't know who our interlocutors are, or where we're saying stuff like I just talked about to persuade some other third party or third parties? Does it work the same way? Is it still like rowing a boat, etc.? And if so, why? Why did these contexts not change that? And if they do change that, then how can you kind of keep some of this sensibility but still account differently for the context itself? Likewise, one of the things I think that you talk about helpfully is the value of understanding bad arguments, and we kind of get this sense of that here. You kind of go back and forth between 2 different things. I'd like to see you work those together a little more closely. So you talk about not being supported by sources that claim similar ideas, and the only possible proof is confidence in the speaker. I think that's interesting. In that ultimately, as you put it here, drawing on Burke, the difference between the 2 arguments are their abilities to recognize reflecting, selecting, and deflecting reality. So that I think this is a really interesting idea. I just would like to hear you kind of trace out more how it all fits together. So I hope that you do that in the Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay, because that sense of like really a bad argument doesn't recognize its own partiality is kind of what it feels like you're saying. And I just like to hear that a little more systematically developed. I think it's really interesting. Now, when you say arguments are meant to be tested, here you're kind of getting at something that we haven't seen much in the statement of belief up to here, which is the question of what are arguments for? Why do we argue? What's the value of argument? Is there a single ultimate goal of argument? Are there a constellation of goals or purposes of argument? How do they fit together? What's that about? And I just want to kind of reflect back. I think your statement of belief is really does challenge yourself to think in complex ways, and I just want to affirm and say that I really value that. So I enjoyed reading this. I'm looking forward to reading your Defining Good Argument digital context essay, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.